I did the same seminar on behalf of Tony 3,400 times. So I taught the same seminar twice a day, every single day for a decade. And after you do it like literally 1,000 times, you get kind of bored. But it was up to me to bring something new to the situation. And that's where the mastery comes in, when you find a meaning in what you're doing.
One of Tony Robbins' top corporate trainers, spent over a decade with him and even started his own company, Wilde Influence, when it comes to mastering the art of storytelling, communication, influencing. Eli's probably one of the best in the world right now. He's somebody who truly cares about transforming people's lives and influencing with the utmost authenticity and integrity.
We always say the height of the pinnacle is determined by the depth of the foundation, and the higher we want to go in our income or our life or our influence, I think we also simultaneously need to go deeper into the foundation of who we are, about why we do what we do, and then at the deepest level, you have compassion for yourself and others.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Legacy in Billions. Today, I have the privilege and honor to be introducing to you one of Tony Robbins' top corporate trainers. He is an incredible human being, spent over a decade with him and even started his own company, Wilde Influence, when it comes to mastering the art of storytelling, communication, influencing. Eli is probably one of the best in the world right now. And also, he's somebody who truly cares about transforming people's lives and influencing with the utmost authenticity and integrity, something that's very rare these days. So I couldn't be more excited to introduce to you guys today, Mr. Eli.
Awesome, brother. Excited to be here.
Yes, sir, man. Appreciate you coming on, brother.
Thanks so much, man. This is going to be great.
Yes, sir. So what I'd like to know, man, to dive into the story is, what were you doing before that you came across Tony Robbins? If you can share with us a little background story, and then what led you into being with Tony?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the short story. I moved to Los Angeles when I was 23. Prior to that, I've been living in a tent in the Rocky Mountains for about 9 months by myself. And I come to LA, and I was supposed to get a job at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which is kind of a miracle. I didn't get the job, and I just started applying for sales jobs, and I got this one selling dental products over the phone to dentists. And it was a huge sales floor, about 300 people, all in these little cubicles, and we all had our script and our process and our phone and our computer and all that, and I just really sucked. And that's when I got into self-development, reading all the spin selling and all the self-development books, and I discovered that it wasn't just about what we say, because everybody was saying the same thing. And I got a lot of feedback from mentors and other people that it was something in my communication. And then I just kept on asking myself, why? Why don't I communicate powerfully often? Why don't I connect? And I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of friends that were guys that were kind of like ladies' men. And I just noticed, even when I said the same thing to a girl, it was a very different response. And as I was going through my self-development journey, I found something called NLP that I know you've studied. And it was fascinating to me. And I did a lot of the work, and I read all these books, and I began to get some changes. And I said to a friend, this is really cool stuff. Have you heard about it? And he says, yeah, you should check out this guy, Tony Robbins. And I was like, who's Tony Robbins? And before I know it, I'm getting the books, the tapes, the CDs. I'm jumping up and down, drinking green juice and going for walks, power walking in the morning. And I was like, this is awesome. And he says in all those CDs and tapes is he's doing what's called seeding, talking about how he's got events where people come to this fire walk and do this stuff. And I'm like, that'd be pretty cool to check out. And next thing I know, he's speaking in Los Angeles with, all these famous people, Donald Trump, Robert Kiyosaki, Susie Orman, Magic Johnson. And I knew it was going to be one of those pitch fest. It was $97 to go, which was a stretch for me. But you go to this thing and everybody's trying to sell you the no money down real estate, the Forex trading, all of that. And Tony comes out and he just shifted the room. And I had been depressed. I was really in a bad place. And within 30 minutes, I'm laughing, I'm crying, I'm seeing this guy interact, and I didn't want to let it go. And so from that point on, I decided to make that experience more part of my life. And I went even deeper into the self-development journey. And I called Tony's company about 200 times in a period of 2 weeks. And I was like, they're going to either give me a job or give me a restraining order. And fortunately, they gave me a job. And I worked my way up from there.
Hey, congratulations, man. That's
Thanks.
Awesome. So the power of persistence, right? Never giving up and being intentional about what you want. Yeah. You also mentioned something to me that sticks out, because a lot of people during this time in life, they deal with a lot of depression. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what you were going through? Because somebody so talented, so skilled, so intelligent, so brilliant now transformed the lives of thousands of people with the work that you do. You have some gift and something very special inside of you. But on the other side, you were depressed in the beginning. What was that breakthrough like for you? How did you transform into, hey, I want to go all in my gift?
I moved to LA and I had this job that I hated, and I had a lot of credit card debt just from, just being careless. And around that time too, I kind of left this out of the story, but it's a very long story, but I ended up meeting this guy who was managing a dude named Tom Welling, who was Superman on the show Smallville. And we became really close, and he was managing him, and they thought he was a shoo-in for the new Superman movie that would have came out like 2004 or something like that. And he said they turned him down, but they're looking for a no name, a new face. And he said, I think you'd be great. So they trained me for like 6 months for this role of Superman. Wow. And as it came through, getting closer and closer to the date they were going to pick, I had a real shot at it. And he was like, hey, here's what you're going to do. And you need to quit your job and you need to go like all in. He says, even if you don't book this, like it's the same agency that was managing like Jim Carrey. It was like a significant agency. And he says, even if you don't get this, you'll get something else. Like, this is awesome. We don't try to find people try to find us. And we're like going after you, and we're going to pay for this and everything. And I just quit showing up one day, and I just quit going to the classes and everything. And I think it was like my insecurity, my fear. And I really started to think about, these tenets of communication in NLP. You cannot not communicate. What you communicate is, from your subconscious, all these things. And I just really sat with like what was inside of me. And at this point, I was in massive debt. I felt like there was something wrong with me, so I didn't have confidence. And then I went really deeply into why am I not going for things? And it was just a pattern in my life. And if you studied NLP or Tony's work, it's a lot about these patterns. And I'd find that I'd get choked up. And I went deeper into the NLP because we can understand that anything's a pattern. Even if somebody's voice is strong, there's a vocal pattern where they're relaxed and then they get tight and then their voice will close up. And so we can recognize all these things. And I just went really deep into this process of working on myself. But the catalyst was just really not liking myself, not liking how I communicated, not liking my past, thinking there was something wrong with me, blaming my parents, blaming myself, blaming my situation. And I think some people go to anything self-development, could be NLP or Tony Robbins or Greg, whatever it is. And they're like, yeah, this is bullshit or whatever. But I was in such a dark place. And the way that Tony showed up, it wasn't just what he said, it was how he was demonstrating it. It was like a life raft for me. And I felt like, I was just in such a bad spot because I had moved to LA, went through all my money. I'm like, all my friends are like party people and doing drugs and sleeping around and all of that. And I just felt empty. And I'm just waking up in the morning, and I was in crazy good shape. I worked out every day, and I had this vision of what I thought it would like success was like. And then I was in great shape. And then even though I got rid of the Superman thing, I went all in on work, and I was making decent money, and I was out of debt. I had savings, but I was like even more depressed because it was like I still wasn't happy. Yeah. And I just felt like I've done all this work, and I was up at 4 a.m, bed at 8 o'clock. I said no to everything for a year after making so many mistakes, and I still wasn't happy. And then there was the process of really understanding of the your emotional home and the patterns and where you live, and we find a way to go home. And I wanted to change my emotional set point, change how I was showing up. And when things didn't go to my favor, I could reframe the meaning of that to empower me towards a new end. And so it was just all the tools and all of that became really great. And so when I sold it to other people, because I had that experience, I had that certainty and the belief that this can change your life. And I think as most people go through self-development stuff or whatever it is, they kind of like, oh, this is like that, or they half-ass it. It was pretty new to me. And I really went all in on it. And so when I sold it or I spoke about it, I spoke from a place of authenticity and certainty, like, hey, this can change your life. And in my outcome,
I have a question.
Yeah.
Was this before you joined Tony that you were selling it? Or this you're talking about when you joined Tony?
When I joined Tony.
Got it.
Yeah, or anything, or what I sell now is just kind of like, I think, when people in this entrepreneur age, they want to get into business or whatever, but I think it takes a lot of reps in order to really get in there. Just like conditioning a muscle, that can be duration or intensity, whatever it is. And so I went deep and hard and fast for a really long time.
And I want to pause you right there because I know that you can fire from all cylinders.
Yeah.
So how long was that process for you of actually going deep within yourself and actually auditing that emotional home?
Well, I don't think it ever stops. I'll still do it now. Journal, write things down, talk to a therapist every once in a while. I have somebody that does like somatic experiencing work for me. And I think all of us want, as they say, to become self-actualized when you look at Maslow's hierarchy. And I think, it's like we always say the height of the pinnacle is determined by the depth of the foundation. A 2-story building has a very different foundation than a 50-story building.
Right.
And the higher we want to go in our income or our life or our influence, I think we also simultaneously need to go deeper into the foundation of who we are, about why we do what we do, and that deeper understanding. And some of it's quite spiritual too, as you go really deep into what we are, who we are, why we do what we do. And then at the deepest level, you have compassion for yourself and others. And sometimes it's that understanding and appreciation for other people when you connect with them that removes the resistance and the reactance to what is. And so I think it never stops.
How do you get to that point where you go to the deepest layer of getting to that compassion? What was that like for you? Was there a moment in time where you just remember you got on your knees, you choked up, you started crying, or an event happened? Was it a circumstance? How did you get to that point where you're like, man, at the deepest layer, it's about compassion for me and others?
I think it's a principle that I've understood for a while. We know, like, people know they should eat right. That's a principle. Should exercise. So these are principles that I've been aware for a while, but the practice and the integration and the beingness of it, even right now in my life, like today, my mom has, the last 6 months, she's had dementia, but she's really fallen off a cliff. And like, she'll text me on a Sunday, like, I'm late for my appointment, and she's freaking out, and I've done all these things. And I feel like saying, it's freaking Sunday. It's not today. And, your mom, you kind of expect your parents to take care of you some. And now I've got to, I've got to run a company. I got all these things, and I'm like dealing with all these things. And my mom's texting me nonsense. Yeah. And I want to say, Mom, it's freaking nonsense. Yeah. But, it's, and you judge your parents and all that. So it's a practice. And I don't think anybody is perfect all the time. Even like the Dalai Lama or whatever, these people we're all human. Yeah. And you see, even the Dalai Lama has done some weird things, or anybody has. And so, it's, you have to kind of laugh at it. And that's why the Buddha is laughing, as he sits, he's kind of laughing at his own, insanity at some point, like at the mind and how it goes. And so that is a practice. I don't think it's anything that, most anybody masters. A handful of people, but certainly not me.
Right. And I appreciate you being open and sharing that. So for you were at a point where you were unhappy with your job, you were depressed, you were trying to figure things out, you've discovered NLP, and you got into the self-development work, and then you were intuitively guided to go to one of Tony's seminars, and then I'm sure that was life-changing for you. Then what was your thought process from there? You said, wow, can I get this product out to the marketplace to help people transform their lives? And if I can do is go all in, like, what was that like for you?
I remember, so I go to this $97 thing, and everybody sells something. And Tony, it was like $900 for UPW, but it was $100 off if you signed up right then. And it was a 2-day event. Tony spoke towards the end of the first day, and I didn't sign up. But I tell a whole story about it. Maybe we'll get to it. But I went home that night, and I couldn't sleep. And I knew that if I didn't sign up, because a lot of times people go to events are like, oh, I'm going to sign up later. And that's what people do. And I was in sales, and I knew I was giving myself an out. And Tony said some things like I didn't have money at the time, and all the excuses, and I didn't want to spend money, the little money I did had. And it's that whole, it's not your resources, it's your resourcefulness. The ultimate resource is human emotion. When you tap into the determination, the faith, and the certainty, you find a way. And I was like, it's like you kind of like, first you hear these things some of the time, but the first time too, I was like, shit, there's something there. And I went to the event. The second day I signed up, and it was like one of the toughest things. Because you go back to the back, if you're at a big seminar, you go to the back of the room, and there's the people trying to sign you up, like the salespeople. And this is like a success seminar. These salespeople, they've got like $50 suits on and $30 shoes. And I'm like, these people aren't successful. If they're into this thing, they should be more successful. And so I'm judging them. And that's just what people do. Like, somebody might sign up for your seminar or your event, or they sign up online, and the sales page freezes for a second. People are like, oh, it's a sign from God. I'm not supposed to sign up. And we always find a reason to do something, or we find a reason not to. And my mind was always looking for an out. And I sat with it that night, like, how long has that been my pattern, where I'm looking for a reason not to lessen the intensity on myself. And really, I'm just afraid of making a decision. But it's like, successful people, it's not that they always make the right decision, but they make the decision right. And you have to find, you might go to a really shitty seminar, and it's amazing because you learn all the things not to do. And then you can go to the best seminar or read the best book in the world. But if you go through it with the filter of, hey, I've heard this before, or this is all bullshit, you don't get anything from it. So we always say that in order for your life or your business or anything to change in your life, 2 things need to happen. Something new needs to come into your life, but also something new needs to come out of you. A new commitment, a new standard, a new lens, a new filter through which you're viewing the experience to take something new, even if it's something you've seen 1,000 times. Like I did the same seminar on behalf of Tony 3,400 times. So I taught the same seminar twice a day, every single day for a decade. And after you do it like literally 1,000 times, you get kind of bored. But it was up to me to bring something new to the situation where I wasn't focused on myself or what I get or whatever. It's like when you see a world-class singer that's been singing the same songs for 30 years, they want to do their new stuff, but the audience wants to hear their classic rock,
right.
80s, 90s jam. And so it's up to them as the artist to bring that to the situation and realize that it's not about, they're not doing it to entertain themselves. It's there to serve other people. And that's where the mastery comes in, when you find a meaning in what you're doing. And so I remember I sign up for the event, I spend the $800 and I go to the UPW, I walk on the fire and all of that. And at the event, like you've been there, everybody's out of their mind.
Yeah.
People, the Dickens process, I am the leader and all this stuff. And they're just going crazy. And the person that actually put the idea in my mind, it's crazy because I haven't thought of him for a while, but I remember on the last day, this guy comes up to me and he's like, I'm going to work for Tony Robbins. I'm going to do all of that. And very similar, Tony says something, that whole thing around standards and being outstanding. He says something very similar for those listening that's very in alignment with like a David Goggins. It's like out of say, like 100,000 people, there'll be like 100 warriors or, 100 warriors. And then there's like the one. Then there's like the one who like finds a way, and it's the outstanding. It's the person who's like the tip of the spear, like how they think, how they act, their commitment. And I remember looking at that room of about 5,000 people, and I was thinking to myself, all these people want to work for Tony. And Tony talks a lot about he said a lot about motive does matter. Like, why do you want to do it? And this guy I was talking to, he said he wanted to work for Tony and he was going to do it. And I was like, that's actually a really good idea. So he gave me the idea, and I thought about what it would take to make that happen. And Tony talks about how most people will fall aside. And I said, if I make this my ultimate success for me, like I decide and I commit to it and I just go all in on it, like I'm going to do it. But also part of the reason that Tony befriended me and we're still friends to this day is I just texted him the other day and he responds when I text him, is because even my motive in working for Tony and doing what we do, I had an experience with him that shifted me. And so I went out there as a proponent of what he was teaching. And so where some people worked in his company solely to get validation from Tony or to be around Tony or to take energy and time from Tony, I was out there on a mission to expose the world to the principles that I felt lived only inside of that man. And so my mission, regardless if I ever met Tony, was to change the world. And I felt like the best vehicle to change the world was to expose people to the experience that I went through. And so I could share my experience. And so, of course, I wanted to make money. Of course, I didn't want to be number one. It was, of course, like I wanted to get validation from Tony. He was like my hero, and I looked up to him like a father figure. So I wanted all of that, but I knew that couldn't be my driving force. And I went out there just crazed and certain in how I approached the company with why I was doing it. And the first time Tony and I ever talked, he kind of did an intervention on me, and he was like, "Who are you? Like, why do you work for me?" And it was a really, really interesting day. And we had like this banter back and forth, and we ended it.
Life was never the same.
Yeah, it was truly a life-changing interaction, and that was crucial for me.
That's phenomenal. So you answered a lot of the questions that I had in mind, which was, how does somebody just go into the company and then rise to the top, becoming truly number one? And it's because you stuck to the mission, not to give a product or just sell another program. You were more mission driven. So why don't we dive into why somebody like yourself, compared to other people who have the same scripts, same training, same access to resources, why do you skyrocket and beat the competition?
When I first started working there, I was also the worst there because all the other speakers are really good and they've been doing this for a while. And when you start out in sales, as most people know, it's like there's the good leads, go to the experienced people.
5, yeah.
And then at the beginning, you had to book your own leads and all of that. And my first full cycle, I was in Colorado Springs, which is just, I hated that place. And it's a very religious place. So people don't seek outside sources of learning and inspiration. They go to church. And it's where the military is. So it was just not the right place at all. And I remember just being really frustrated. I had an awesome roommate, I had an awesome mentor that was the sales manager in the company, one of my best friends named Roberto. And I was working hard, but I got really frustrated, and I just put in more reps and more time, but it was really hard to book meetings. And now everybody knows who Tony Robbins was, but this is 2005. And so it's like, Tony who? Is this Zig Ziglar, Tom Hopkins? Is this like the no money down real estate thing? Like Tony wasn't that famous. And we were going to companies to get people to do a 45-minute or hour presentation. And we're asking people for not only 4 days of their life plus travel and all of their money to go to something. And it was really, really tough. But I got a lot of leadership, not just from, my roommate, but also the leadership within the company, not Tony. And then after a year of just trial and error, I got pretty good. And I'll never forget, I ended up, it was really a blessing for me because Tony's son wanted to be a speaker. And Tony said to his son, he's like, well, if you want to be a speaker, it's one thing to be a speech maker and do a talk and tell some stories. He said people will clap for you, but that doesn't mean that you're good. Like people are pretty nice. He said at the end of the day, people ultimately vote with their dollars. And you only know if you're good you only know that it's valuable if people give you money.
100%.
And he's like, you want significance, you want to be the star, you want to be on stage, all of that. He's like, none of that's it. He's like, you need to learn how to sell. And he said to his son, like, you need to find the best speaker in the company, the best salesperson to speaker in the company, and live with that guy. And so Jarek and actually Tony's brother-in-law, who runs the company now, Scott Humphrey, they did ride-alongs with all the speakers in the organization. And they did like a day with each person. And they were like, and Tony said, like, find the guy who's the best and live with that dude, because that's going to shift you. And like, bar none, like everybody in the company at that point would have said I was the best speaker. And so next thing I know, I'm living with Tony's son and his brother-in-law. And I had all these really stupid questions for Tony. And I had to say, Jarek, Scott, can you ask Tony this? Can you ask Tony this? And he'd give me these really great responses. And eventually I got directly connected to Tony, and I get to ask him stupid questions personally. And he always
what a privilege.
Yeah, he always had, even today, he's always had just brilliant responses that made me think differently about my own communication with myself and others in those intense moments, to be able to kind of rewire myself. But to go back to your question, I just worked really hard and I pushed through, and I think it was the development, and it was really a blessing too, because when you have somebody who's as good as Tony, you feel like you've done all that you can. And every 3 months we'd do a UPW, and then you'd see what Tony would do from stage, and then I'd be like, and this is before iPhones and all of that. I would go to those events with a small tape recorder and I would record what Tony was saying, and then I'd go home and I'd transcribe by hand what he was saying, and I'd highlight with like a pink highlighter the questions that were coming out of his mouth. Because Tony talked about like the whole triad: focus, meaning, physiology. And so I really began to look at the questions Tony was asking. And if you see Tony on a podcast or anything like that, or a seminar, about 60% of what comes out of his mouth are questions. And even in a sales dialogue, as you know, questions control the conversation. I could ask you about your shoes or your mom or what you ate, but really skilled questions. And or even when I'm speaking on stage, I might do what's called rhetorical questions, where I ask myself a question, and that brings up a question. So the question you should really be asking is, so for those of you watching, you need to ask yourself this. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so haven't we all done that? And so he's getting agreements. And so I started to look at what he was doing strategically and structurally that's beyond NLP, way beyond just the tools in NLP, because he's got NAC, and we've advanced it even more than Tony in the realm of just influence, because what Tony does is just mainly for therapeutic intervention. And there's clearly some sales in what Tony does, but that's not the intent of it. Yeah. For what I do and what we do, it's the intent. We extracted all those tools and made them with the intent to sell. And so we're constantly doing what's called fractionization, getting the audience in their own mind, and then taking them out of it, pulling them in and out of trance. And so some of it's the tonality, the framing, all of that. But I just became fascinated with Tony.
So let me stop you right there, because we'll go on to the next question where we can talk more about that. So you came in, you were on a mission, you absolutely crushed it. You became #1 best speaker. And then what inspired you to say, hey, you know what? I think it's time to start my own company, my own business, and get the blessing from Tony?
Several times. Like about 10 years ago, we started a stem cell company, and we're just way ahead of our time. I was on Good Morning America. There's a girl that I used to date that is now pretty high up there. So she got me on Good Morning America, like the most watched show. And we ended up, millions of people saw this segment. I was in the segment, and we literally got 0 leads. I think it was just ahead of our time with this whole stem cell thing. And I had an operation done on there. So I left the company several times, and I was going to do my own thing, or I just was burnt out. So I'd leave for like a few months. And then like one time because I had the acting thing, I left the company after 3 years, and I had this different mindset around acting. So I went back into the acting thing. And within a few months, there was a billboard of me in Times Square. I'm like booking shows and all of that, but I got really sick. And that's when Tony and I became closer because they wanted me to come back to the company. Tony coached me that year. Actually lived here in Miami at the time. It was 2010 when I came back after leaving the first time. I was so sick. I spent half the week in bed or a hospital bed. But that year, Tony coached me, and I still broke every sales record in the company, working half as much. And that year, Tony created an award in my name. Now, whoever's the biggest impact in Tony's company gets this award. And he took me to Fiji for a week, and we really began to solidify this relationship. And then I'd leave every once in a while, so I left a few times. And I was always looking to be entrepreneurial, and then it would just make sense. Like they'd be back in a city I wanted to go, and I'd come back. So I was kind of in and out a lot, which isn't common, but my results were so much better than most people. Yeah. They let me do a lot of things. Right. I officially left the company March 2019, and right then Tony did a couple months after that, he did a UPW in London, and he asked me to come, and they did like a day 5 UPW there. I hosted it. I spoke at it. It was like my event for Success Resources. They're the company that would broker in Tony back then and for those events, and went really well. And the reason they wanted me to come mainly because Tony wanted to talk to me. It was Tony had just done that thing with Dean Graziosi, the KBB thing. Yeah. So he was really busy, but we had a plan to create our own, like a sales course together. Tony would have done the mindset piece, and I was going to do everything together. And so we kind of planned it all out. There were some key players in that interaction where it just kind of fell through. And then he just got so busy, and I took another partnership. But he's always been really supportive of everything. Even people in the company shouldn't use Tony's name very much. I try not to, but people are interested in Tony and some of the organization. So I don't say personal things, but I'm always tactful in that. So I respect the relationship, and he's been like a second father to me. So I get some lineage there. But I outgrew the position probably 10 years ago. And I could have made way, way, way more money. I was being offered things to make way more money. And now pretty much anybody like I coach kids that are 23 years old that make a healthy 7 figures a month. And, some of it's marketing, and it's not all profit. When I say that, it's not all profit. But I see these companies, and even back then, before coaching online and all was really big, I had these opportunities, but I do feel like Tony's the best. And so I never felt like I should do my own thing and really fully leave Tony and do something else unless I felt like what I was doing was far beyond the capacity of what Tony could teach or would teach. And in sales, we've taken all those frameworks, we've adapted them. Anybody else who's like the top people in sales, like if you mention anybody, they've been through my stuff or I've coached their company. Some really huge, like bajillion-dollar companies. Jeremy Miner, who's really famous now, we coach him on the speaking side. And he's helped me with things too, but we're like the top 0.001%.
Yeah, the category kings of their space. So.
That I've coached all of them at this point. Yeah. And so we have something really unique, and I've of course pulled a lot from Tony, but I never felt like, I feel like you should always kind of outgrow your mentor in some way. And not to say that I've outgrown Tony, right, but he's doing like finance stuff and books, and he's also he's not going to go all in on sales and influence. Right. And the first skill that he did learn was that. Right. So that was his first program. That's what he did for Jim Rohn, when it was all about influence and selling. And so he's not touched it really for 40 years. And now leveraging my association with that brand and the other people that we coach, we can be like the true category king. And I'm not really concerned about being like category king as far as like famous, right, but as far as impact and being in companies and also revenue. Will be category king.
100%. I love that. So the companies that were hiring you when you were with Tony, like the Salesforce, billion-dollar companies, what was the number one problem you were solving for them?
Well, the thing is, all these companies, I would go in to do a presentation to sell UPW. So I did my 1 hour presentation, and I'd get myself into companies like Salesforce that didn't take in anybody, even though Tony has a relationship there and he coached the main person. But I always had a way of getting myself in. And if I spoke to one division of a company, I rocked it so hard, I would get into the other divisions of the company. And so they saw how I showed up. And then in any of these companies where you have people that have no idea what self-development is, never read a book, and then you have people that are into coaching self-development, and then you have people that are like Tony fans. And these people that I was speaking through, they were not Tony fans, but some of the people in the company were fans of self-development, NLP, and they're like, yeah, we've had Tony Robbins speakers in before, other speakers. They were like, this was really good. And they would say, Tony does some NLP hypnosis, like voodoo shit on our brain that keeps us listening and all of that. Or like, I don't know what that is, but you clearly do that too. Could you come back and break down some of these models, some of these things that you're doing to anchor us, to frame us, to deframe objections and create all of that to like, they're like, you're clearly doing something. We don't know what that is, but we want to know it. So a lot of times when I came back to companies, it was to work with C-suites and executive teams. And sometimes they'd say things like, we want to learn how to mind control people. We want to hypnotize people. And I didn't have any program or anything for it, but I was like, well, what am I doing? What is this process? And I'd slowly begin to extract things that I learned in NLP, things I saw Tony do, things that I didn't know what I was doing until I took NLP, because I was already unconsciously doing a lot of things just from modeling Tony. And then we began to create frameworks and I'd show them the model. And so that's how I'd have those companies there where, of course, I was working for Tony, but my side income would also come from going back into those organizations and
as
doing
a
my own
personal
training.
brand.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, it was just like, hey, that was awesome.
Yeah.
They're like, do you have anything else?
Yeah.
I was like, well, for Tony, we got more events. And they're like, yeah, but could you teach us stuff?
Yeah.
And this is something I've worked on the last few years. And I remember even when I first started getting my first coaching clients, probably like 2014, that I'd say, yeah, Tony this, Tony that. And people would be like, yeah, we don't really like Tony. We don't really care about Tony. They're like, what can you teach us? And I would give Tony probably more credit than I should have, but he's my mentor. And I give people a lot of credit, but we just a lot of reps and feedback. And anytime I saw somebody that I thought was better than me, I gave them all my money so I could learn one thing. About half the time it was a waste of time and money, but sometimes I really learn. And I always learn something. And so just doing that for years and years and spending like ungodly amounts of money on coaching and self-development, because my outcome wasn't even to be rich. I just wanted to be able to be the best at this, whether it's getting dropped off into town and needing to negotiate my way out of something. I wanted the practical application of the tools. And then once we got some, I started teaching them and people started paying us.
Incredible. I relate a lot to what you're saying because when I left Patrick Bet David, I was getting calls from some of my previous clients who are like, who are these people that are calling me on the phone right now? I was in Patrick because of you. Now that you left, what's next? Where are we going? Yeah. And it made me feel deeply grateful for the relationship that I was able to foster as a result, and to know that people truly care about the individual. Not saying that Patrick isn't great at what he does, but to show the power of influence within yourself and the value you create for others. Like, people are more interested sometimes in hiring you, like they did with those companies. Yeah. That same exact thing happened to me. I even had a podcast guest one time where I brought him in and I was trying to do strategic business development and bring him into the Kentucky Derby, which Patrick Bet David does a private executive suite, limited for 20 people. It's a very high profile event. And it's like $40,000 for seats just for 2 people to be there. And I was inviting him in the podcast, and then I wanted to pitch him on the opportunity of coming, which I knew he was the ideal client and fit for that, because he wasn't the mentorship and coaching type, but he wanted to be a part of those immersive experiences and have the network. And he's like, listen, I don't care about what Patrick Bet David's doing. Here's $5,000. I just want to show you I value the relationship and I care about you. Wow. And this guy has become one of my best friends, almost a big brother to me, because he's always giving me advice and I'm always giving him value back. But he's like, I care about you and I want to show this is a win-win relationship. And no matter where you go or where you're Patrick, it was always about you. Wow. And I was awesome. So grateful for that. So I resonate a lot with what you're doing. And now that you have your own company, I want to learn from you that you've been able to go into different organizations and different companies from all walks of life. You've taught them influence and you've been able to teach them sales process to their organizations. What are you doing now to leverage influence online, and how important would you say is personal branding in the world we live in today?
I think it's super important. I'm not focused on it very much. Just like this last Friday, I was telling you before we got on here, Alex Hermosi sold his company Gym Launch, and the guy that runs it now is Cale Owen. So he was at my place Friday. We did like a VIP day, mapping out the event. And when you see a lot of these major big pitches on stage, when they offer something, it is my words, because we write the words that come out of their mouth, and we we also work on their stage presence, delivery, all of that. So we're helping that. So this offer, Hermosi actually wrote, so that because he wrote the book on offer, so it's his offer. But the structure around it, the framing, and all of that, we go into, and so we've gotten so much business not from focusing on a brand or any of that, but we get shout outs, or people that are really high up will say, you need to connect with this guy. And so the last few years we've just been full, and we have programs that are scalable, like the sales stuff. But most of the stuff that we've done, because me and my business partner would actually do a lot of coaching and a lot of writing and creating, and it's really time consuming. And so we're segmenting some of that stuff out. We'll have base programs people go through on their own, and we'll have other coaches and all of that, and we'll have some like really high level clients, and like we'll write and give feedback. But if somebody's doing a presentation and it's an hour, like to break it down for them and give them notes on it, it's at least 4 or 5 hours of our time for that 1 hour. Because we got to break it down, take notes on it, rewrite it, and then we got to hop on a call with them for an hour. They do it, and then give them feedback on it. So it's a long process, even for one hour presentation. And so we're removing a lot of the things right now that aren't scalable. And because the experience has been so good for the people that we have worked with, we've just been really word of mouth. And we start ads. We're doing we did like a virtual event. So we'll do a virtual event every month. We'll do a virtual event where we get people in, where they see what we do. And then we'll have a delivery event every month. So we're scaling back a lot of what we do as far as access. And for the last couple of years, I've really limited access to me. Even some of my best friends say I'm like one of the hardest people to get a hold of. But I just try not to look at my phone very much unless it's like being really intentional. Yeah. And I love to read and all of that. So we're just, building things out from a personal brand perspective slowly, to make sure that everything is scalable. Because I see a lot of people do it, get really big, but their delivery and their program and the effectiveness of what they do, it's not very good. So we're wanting it to be the best. So
if I understood what you said correctly, since you have such an incredible program that's delivered so many great results, you kind of haven't been in a need to take on new clients. Not that saying that you won't, but you've been mostly consumed by working with these big clients that you have been working with behind the scenes, like the Hermosis, the Jeremy Miners. So your efforts on marketing, personal branding weren't needed to, as now you're looking to build your marketing systems, your brand, and get more of your message out online. Is that right? I'd
say we're talking with Kale. He's somebody I coach. I haven't coached the Hermosis at all. But Alex, I wouldn't say we're best friends, but if I text him right now, he responds. He's an awesome guy. And so seeing how he's built out the offers and runs the company and all of that, I'm really blessed because I coach a lot of these companies, but I'd be an idiot not to pick up on certain things they're doing clearly better than what I'm doing. And nobody's doing it better than Alex right now. He's just dominating.
Yeah, his personal brand has really blown up. I think he's one of the top faces right now when it comes to entrepreneurship and business, and with the investment that he made into school, which is part of the creator economy.
Yeah, we talked about a month ago. I was going to help him with some of the sales process with events and all of that, but it's just like everybody wants to buy, no matter what I just said, man, if he does a video on YouTube, he gets like 1 million views. If Tony does a video on YouTube, it'll get like 20,000. Or Grant Cardone. I mean, Alex is just, it's unprecedented what he's doing. And so I would be pretty dumb not to learn, as I'm spending time with him, not to learn from him, like what he's actually doing. But he's really open with it. Even the stuff that he puts on YouTube is really good. And so I've just kind of discounted that stuff, like, it doesn't matter. But if we're going to have a scalable business, we have to build a brand as well. 100%. And so he's been all in on brand. And so for me, I think there was always a bit of a conflict too, because I worked for Tony, and my sales thing, part of my effectiveness in sales was my certainty and saying that Tony was the best. There's nowhere else. Like, this is the thing, which is true and not true. But for me, it was. But then getting out of it and having my own thing, now I got to sell myself, which is a totally different thing. I think it's easier to sell somebody else, even if you believe in it, and then selling yourself. Because then if you get pushback or whatever. So I think I've just been conditioned to promote Tony for so long that it's also a mental shift that I'm just become aware of in the last few months. I'm like, okay, like, why am I not doing some of these things where it actually could help more people and we'd make a lot more money? So that's why I say it never stops. But I was like, that's all I ever wanted to do. I would have been happy being a behind the scenes like Tony employee for a while, forever. But I think it's just not my calling. Like, I kind of grow out of it, and there's been a need where all these other brands and influencers saying, like, what are your results and why are they so much different than everybody else's? And I'd say it's just these things. And they'd be like, and I'd just show them, and I would say, was that valuable? They're like, yeah, that was really valuable. And they're like, can we pay you for more? I'd be like, okay. And so it just, I never had an intention. I never had an intention to start my own sales influence company, but people just started asking so much. And so it's just kind of evolved. But now time to make this a real business where we have the delivery down, but the marketing and all of that, the positioning, the branding, we've not focused on.
That's the next step for you.
Yeah.
Good for you, man. I'm excited to see the evolution. I believe in what you've done, because not only have I heard so many great things, but I could tell that your authenticity and your integrity and who you come from, it's just, you don't got to be sold. It's like, wait, what? This guy was with Tony for freaking 10 plus years, and now he started his own company, and the people that you've worked with, I mean, you have so much credibility already. So why don't we get a little bit more into sales?
Sure.
When you're in a sales conversation with somebody and you know that the product can change their life or their business, how do you navigate through the emotions when they hit you with, funny objections or absurd things that you're just like, how does that even make sense? Like, how do you handle those objections in a way where you can reframe them and make them now think about, hey, I didn't see things that way.
Yeah. It's interesting with objections. We're really big on pre-handling objections, and it's in sales now. There's so many kind of opposing views with different sales stuff, and I won't throw anybody under the bus. But we're really big on the psychology of it. And two people can say the same thing to you, get a very, and you respond differently, not based on just what to say, but who they are. And if the relationship is strong enough, I mean, there's level of relationship where this person sees you as an enemy, as a friend, as a trusted advisor, as a mentor. And so really looking at the relationship early on and the state, because all decisions are state dependent. And so we teach something called, state sensitivity, pre-framing. And Tony said this to me one time. He says, outside of rapport, the most important thing in a sales conversation, in speaking or anything, is the pre-frame. And so the pre-frame is a frame around what is said. So it changes how they view, like, even if I say, here's what's going to happen, and if I frame something around what that happens, you're more certain and you feel comfortable about that thing. And so we really look at what people are saying in a script, and we could look at anybody's script and look at anybody's conversation. And so we're really big in changing their perception, because it's not about like just what you say, it's about how it's received. And there's a certain point in a relationship where if I have enough trust, I can just say, hey, you're being a little bitch. And they laugh. Yeah. And then they're like, yeah, and they do it. Somebody else I say that to, they're like, well, screw you. Yeah. And so how do we get somebody unconsciously comfortable in a place where we pace and lead them to a way where they are comfortable with us advising them to the point where we get them, we make a recommendation on what they should do with the rest of their life. And so I see coaching and sales as that, because this is somebody's livelihood, this is the direction of their life. And so that's what we're doing here. And so to make sure there's the trust and the responsiveness before that happens. And there's, whether it's Jeremy or there's all these kind of online gurus, and they say some things, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I say some things, and sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. And we would go really deep into why it works, sometimes why not. And you could do all this research on personality types. Are people D or I or S or C? But really it's about helping them access a state. And there's things in NLP like labeling. And, even I won't throw anybody under the bus, but there's even like world-class sales trainers that make people feel dumb, that make people feel wrong. And you hear people on podcasts are like, yeah, this guy's being a little bitch and all of that. And I think some people do like to be talked down in that way. Like they need that kind of daddy figure. But at the end of the day, when somebody makes a really strong decision for their life, they want to feel smart. They want to feel reasonable. They want to feel helpful. So we're helping them access states and what we say, part of identity, to get them to access a resource state within themselves. Because I believe that every no person has a yes person inside of them. And so there's some basic things that you can do in any objection where you ask them some questions. You can do a lot of NLP stuff that's based in sleight of mouth to pull apart the objection. I'm sure your intention isn't just to save money. Your real intention is to make sure you never have to worry about money again. That's the real intention here, isn't it? So isn't it more important when we look at the most successful people? Can you think of a time that you tried to save money, but it ended up costing you even more money in the long run? counterexample. So there's all these frames. And so typically there'll be some key questions. I can appreciate that you think that money is a bit of an issue. Let me ask you, do you think this actually can help you get X, Y, Z result? Okay, why do you think that it can? And then they reinforce it. So there's typically like a system of questions, and we need to establish, is this fear-based? Is this logical? Like they really do need to talk to somebody, move some money around, whatever. And so it takes a little bit of reps to be able to distinguish. As we say, don't just read the script, read the person. Like, is this a bullshit answer? Are they lying? Because sometimes you might challenge somebody, but if somebody really does need to talk to their spouse and you challenge them, you might destroy that lead. But even if somebody really does need to talk to their spouse, say it's a man, and I get a sense of that, I can get a sense of it, I might say things, I might just casually say, it's like, yeah, I was in a relationship and it was just so bad because I was always asking her for stuff, like, what do you think? And it was so irresponsible for me to burden my wife. Like, how disgusting is that for a man like me to have to put the blame? Like, women don't want to make decisions. I knew my wife wanted me to actually make decisions for her. That's what she wants. And so I don't know what the business relationship is like for you, and then I'll go into a bit, but I'm seeding things. I'm seeding. So there's belief seeds that precede the thing that grows into a yes. And so some of it will be the frame that I hold, the psychology, how I get them to view the investment, the meaning, the future pace, the regret that they're going to feel if they don't do something and do something now. So we're installing urgency. So there's a lot of little things. And we always say this, it's like, we teach there's 6 phases of the call, but I said, even if you just had 3, there'd be like a connection stage. And most people lose the sale at the connection stage because they sound like everybody else. There would be an engagement stage, and then there'd be a commitment stage. And so I say this, imagine if a dude meets a girl and they're going to get married, and they met, they had a good time, they spent some time engaged, and now they're walking down the aisle to get married. And the woman walks down the aisle, sees the man. The preacher says, hey, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband until death do you part? And she says, I got to think about it. The dude calls me and says, Eli, I just got an objection. She wants to think about it. What should I say? I say, bro, you probably missed some things in the engagement stage. You probably missed some things up here where you weren't ready to ask for that commitment. And I think that we need to be able to read the person, because sometimes this person is clearly they're not open to even be pitched. They're not open to the offer. We don't have a clear problem. They've been disingenuous in some of their answers as far as getting to the emotional root. And some of that is because they don't trust the salesperson. They're skeptical because the salesperson has said something within the first couple minutes where they're like, hey, at the end of this call, I want a yes or a no. I just can't take a maybe. Is that fair? Or they're being like too pushy. And some people want to be pushed. Some people like, man, this guy's so alpha. He just told me what to do, and they need that. And I think we all need a little daddy energy to somebody to tell us what to do sometimes. But how we frame it and how we get to that point is very different for each person. And part of how we kind of hijack this is I use a lot of their words. But even if somebody comes to, like, we were doing seminars in this building, I used to live downstairs, and I would have my audience, and I teach this piece on authority, about how important it is to be perceived as an authority. And you perceive somebody as an authority for many different ways consciously. It could be their cars, their money, their fame, their brand, whatever, but unconsciously. It's based on movement, appearance, confidence, connection, and intent. And I teach each one of these on how we perceive it and how somebody moves, how they communicate, their intention behind. You get a sense of that builds this sense of authority and trust. And as I'm teaching this bit, it's like a 20-minute bit. I talk about how this is so important. And I say, think about how you get to be an authority for somebody. Like, think about it. It's not to control them. But think about this even in your own life, where somebody's an authority. What does that mean? They tell you to do something, and you do it. And you just trust them because why? They're an authority. Think about how good does it feel for somebody to just tell you what to do, and you just do it. How good does it feel for somebody to give you advice that you know is going to make a meaningful meaningful like result in your life? But what am I doing in that bit? I'm getting them to create a positive association to being told what to do. Yeah. How good does it feel? So at Tony's event, like UPW that you went to, he does this whole thing on decisions. You can't not make a decision. You're always making a decision what to focus on, what things mean, what you're going to do. And think about in your life, you made a decision to work at that job, and maybe the job didn't work out, but had you not made that decision, you wouldn't have met your spouse. And so he's creating a positive association to making decisions. And so I'm creating an association. So also, even taking a risk, even investing, we want to create a positive association, but we need to recognize the current association. So as we say, it's all about pattern recognition, pattern utilization, pattern creation. That's Tony bit. But we're always recognizing patterns in this person, how they perceive authority, how they perceive investing, all of that. And so we might reframe. We can use these patterns and all of that, metaphors, examples, analogies. But if you do it, at the end, it's very different. But I create commitment and consistent and buy-in when I'm challenging people early on in the call. Because if I challenge somebody with the best objection handler, if I've been a yes man for 30 minutes, oh, that makes sense. I can see why you said that. Okay, and is that having an impact on you? In what way? And you do this for 30 minutes and it's all pretty blanket examples and all of that. And it's good. And you kind of just had this surface level conversation where you haven't challenged them. And then at the end, you get an objection and you say, hey, can I challenge you? And you bring this daddy energy there. It's inconsistent. And so consistency and commitment, commitment in how I'm going to be and what I'm looking for. And I remember a life-changing book that nobody needs to read. You can download the notes on Google, but it's called The Challenger Sale. And in 2008, when the economy crashed, I went through this book, and you can just read a 5-minute synopsis because it's a long book. But just the principle I'm going to give here will be enough for people. They broke down salespeople to personality types. There's the relationship builder, the order taker, all these different types of salespeople. And when the economy crashed, as it's going down now, it's becoming harder. The sales became more difficult for everybody, and everybody's sales went down except for this one personality type, the challenger. So from the onset of the conversation, they were looking to challenge the prospect and change their belief and their perspective about their problem, about their goal, about their organization. So it wasn't just asking questions and getting answers. The call in and of itself was valuable. So we're looking to build value. What is value? Value when we change somebody's perspective or belief. And anytime you get a seminar and you get all these aha moments and these dopamine hits, the response that you want from your prospect isn't, yes, I agree. The response is, wow, I never thought of it like that. That's okay. And they go internal a bit. And in that internal state, we can map out a process on how to get clarity on what's different now. And if we show them specifically what's going wrong, we change their perspective around that and map out a process for them that they agree to would be better than what they're currently doing, and they feel certain about that, they're going to move forward. And if we also have the price versus cost juxtaposition, consequence questions, cost of inaction, whatever it is, but if they can clearly see the ROI and the COI, the cost of inaction, around this thing that they're fully bought into, and then it does make logical sense. And now based on the connection and some of the stories and the questions we ask, it makes emotional sense as well. And so if you do that, more times than not, you're going to get a sale.
World class, brother. You are incredible. Thank you so much for the value that you provided with the audience.
Sure.
If I had a pen and paper right now, man, I would not stop writing because that was absolute money. If a business owner wants to skyrocket their influence, what's the fastest way to do that? How do they get started? What books do you recommend? What do they do?
It's a few years ago, I was coaching we had the Taylor Welch, who's brilliant. They had Traffic and Funnels.
You coached them?
Well, they saw me speak. They brought me in to speak, and Cole Gordon was in the audience. He was working there, and they liked me so much they gave me 10% ownership of their company, the Sales Mentor, 8-figure company, and they made me the face of it. And we created this whole thing. We had a couple thousand people a month going through my sales training. Cole Gordon went through it, and now Cole does millions and millions and millions a month.
He's at least, I would say he's at the top for sure.
Yeah, he's amazing. So initially he was learning from me. Now I learn from him because he's figured out marketing and media buying and all that. He's truly brilliant. And we created all these different processes there, and we had some lead magnets. I think if people just even go to my website, we have all the questions, because initially I think the first phase of getting good at sales is people are like, what do I say? And after you understand what to say, but again, two people can say the same thing, get a different response. We look at the strategy of why are we actually saying what we're saying, the principles and the energy. And then once people get enough reps, we begin to look at some of the framing patterns. And so we teach at surface level, personality level, identity level. And when you see Tony Robbins, like at the last event, he's selling people an identity, a compelling future, and making some shifts there. So I think as far as books, we created a PDF. It's just on my website with the story, the frames, and the questions. It's like a 20-minute read. And I know people that every day say they close $30,000 sales just reading word for word what's inside of our little ebook. And so it's free. I think that would be the best for people. And it's based upon like the 300 sales books that I've read that I think mostly are garbage. And you go through these books, and if they're good, it's like so much fluff. It's like so much. I'm in the process of writing these books now. And the first book is going to be like a true book with all like the tactics, like exactly what to say in every scenario. And then we'll have one that's like the mindset of sales, and then another one that's like the spiritual side of selling, like energy and all the woo-woo shit. And when you get a lot of these sales books or even a sales course, it's like there's all this mindset stuff that people skip over, which is super important. And they're like, just give me the objection handlers. I was that same person. And then they do it. They're like, this doesn't work. But the mindset stuff is really important.
Yeah.
So I'm going to segment it for people, because after you get exhausted in seeing other people say these things and they're not working, it's your energy, it's your psychology, it's your capacity to focus on others, not be self-absorbed. It's how you react or respond to resistance. And it's all of that energy. And, even we did an event, I spoke at a seminar yesterday, and I teach a lot of Tony frames that he's pulled from NLP, like the triad. You have a triad right now, I have a triad. And if I offer you to buy something right now and you say no, and I have the perfect objection handler to handle your objection, but when you said it, I made it mean something bad about me, about you, about the world, that God's punishing me, that I'm stupid, I'm not good at sales. I create this disempowering meaning. I focus on, I can't pay my rent, I'm going to look bad on camera. Even if I have the best words based on how I've processed the meaning and where my focus goes, that makes a biochemical shift in my physiology.
Big time.
And now how I say the perfect words, I'll say them with fear or anger or nervousness in my voice. And then you respond not to my words, you respond to my energy.
It's so powerful.
When you see Tony at those events where he'll like do an intervention and he'll call some women a bitch or call some guy a pussy or whatever it is, he's got so much rapport and connection. And even if he doesn't, he knows how to lead it, but he's also not affected. It helps the fact that he's a giant, but he's had a lot of reps.
So good at doing that. Like I actually heard this from one of your other podcasts where you have to step into the world or into their story, but you can't buy into it. You got to remain unaffected.
Yeah.
How do you do that so well? That's something that I would love to personally improve on right there.
It was at that event where Tony and I interacted for the first time, and I asked him this question around influence, and he said something to me that was so powerful. It's this kind of quote, and I recorded it, I wrote it out, and I said this thing that he said to me to myself every single day, like for like 10 years. And every time I did a presentation, I said what he said. I said this thing to him myself, and it put millions in my bank account. And just like with anything, it's repetition, intensity. I meditated on it. And I'll share what he said. He said, to influence someone, we must be connected to that person. We can't only understand them intellectually, because you can understand somebody and you can judge them. You can never influence somebody if they feel judged by you. You must connect to them. Their needs, their wants, their desires, their fears. You have to step into their world without buying into their story. That's a unique balance, to step into somebody's world and appreciate, but not buy into their limitation. If you buy into their limitation, you've added no value to their life. The added value you offer representing me and our partnership with these potential clients and customers is that we don't buy their limitation. And so he goes on from there, but it's like that is the thing. And as another quote from Bruce Lee, the mind that perceives the limitation is the limitation. And there's these tenets in NLP, like people are not their behavior. So I truly do believe, and this is one of my core beliefs, that people are capable of more, people are capable of anything. People run races that don't have legs. Like what a human being is actually capable of is freaking awesome. And so this person, like if nobody else believes in them or they don't believe in them, like just the fact that I have certainty that you can do more and I care, that's that. And then I'm not making you wrong. We're looking, and what I'm looking for in this conversation are your patterns of behavior, your thoughts, your feelings, or emotions that maybe you picked up in your environment or got conditioned or triggered. And so I'm seeking to break the hold of patterns, your thoughts, feelings, emotions, your habits, how you deal with your money, the meanings that you have attached to yourself or your self-worth. There's a pattern there that can be interrupted and broken and conditioned and changed. And so I'm starting off with that as my container, that you're capable of more, but we need to recondition your behavior. And the intention, even if I handle like an objection, I think it's how they're focusing, it's the meaning, and I think all of that can be changed. And I think it's amazing what people can do. And I've seen people that I thought that I did judge a bit, and I didn't think they'd be very successful in Tony's company, or I trained somebody and they completely surprised me. Like somebody I thought was completely not very competent or very good, and they surprised me because they worked so hard and they blew my mind like I was wrong. And then I've seen other people, when I worked for Tony, I would train the other speakers, and there'd be some guys came in, like 6'3", stud, big voice, good looking guy. I'm like, this dude, like I'm gonna pour into this guy. This guy's gonna awesome. He's been the number one speaker. I'm gonna coach this guy, pour more into him. Big ego, shit the bed, making people wrong, no rapport. And I was just like, man, it's like, so I don't know. And so I think somebody has to be ready, and I can help that person, but that person's not ready to expand. But when somebody's there, and they have every limitation and they crack something inside of them, I don't know when it's going to happen. And it's not up to me, but I'm there to guide them to that place and find that thing inside of them to access more of who they actually are. And so that's the intention behind all of this. And so if people feel like that's real and they trust you and they feel like your intent is to actually serve them, just like Tony in those interventions, because people will stand up and say, I've never said this to anybody, but here they are saying it in front of 20,000 people. It's because of the environment and the trust and the belief and the compassion that he has. And so I think that if we can bring more of that to the conversation, we could use the best or the worst objection handler, and it's going to make a difference, because who we are is more important than what we say, as Emerson said. And if Warren Buffett gave you some advice, you'd take it. But if a bum gave you the same advice word for word, you would not based on the advice, based on who they are. And how a lot of salespeople are, they're bums, and their capacity to get a handout, to try to get something. Because even the intention, they're trying to get something to validate themselves as number one or great or awesome or wealthy. It's not for the other person. And so if you challenge somebody, even if I make them wrong, I'm not making them wrong to inflate myself or make myself right. I'm doing it to challenge somebody to help them break their pattern. So the intention is so important. And then when we go through companies and I hear people, I'm like, I could sell more with your script, even if I said the same words, because of this and the capacity to make somebody feel safe.
How do you do such a good job to connect with somebody and build that type of rapport and kind of open them up to be able to challenge them and move them? Because that's a superpower right there.
Yeah,
because not everybody's open. People have their guard up when you're on a call, when they know they're going to get pitched something. Mm-hmm. Even though you have the right intention and you can tell they're guarded up, what do you do to soften them up?
Well, I think, it's respect is really big. And, if you take in any sales course, people often say this thing that I've been saying for years. There's two core emotions we want to transfer. One is certainty, the other is clarity. But as we're getting this interaction or this resistance, the other C word would be curiosity. And I love this quote. I've meditated on this for so many years. All communication is a loving response or a cry for help. Mother Teresa said that. And if what I'm getting is not a loving response, it is a cry for help. And so that person doesn't necessarily be challenged or beat down. They need some compassion. Because they have references in the past that created this wall of skepticism where people did waste their time. They did hop into a course and the coach didn't show up, or they didn't show up, or they let themselves down. And so they're trying to protect themselves. And so I'm going to seek, even say I was doing intervention with somebody, it's like, were there times in the past where you went all in or you did open up and this bad thing happened? What else could that have meant? Well, it was a bad thing. How do you know it was a bad thing? Sometimes, here's a metaphor, sometimes like going to school, people go to school and don't do anything with their degree, but that course that you took that didn't work out, that was the wisdom, that was the education that you had to have and the tuition you had to pay to give you the wisdom you now have to make a better decision to be on this conversation. So what's really going on? And so there's metaphor, analogy, all of that, but we're reacting to what is. And ideally, we want to have a deeper than surface level conversation. And, if something's not working, you change your approach. So sometimes you might try something, or, and sometimes somebody could be like this kind of an angry person, and people like people who are like themselves. And so you have some guys kind of like right away, like fuck you energy. Sometimes you can diffuse it, but sometimes give them fuck you energy right back. Yeah. Hey man, I can tell you're the kind of guy that doesn't fuck around. Let's get right into it. And they're like, yeah, this guy, something's different about this guy. Yeah. And so, it's like sometimes you'll try some things. And the principle is sensory acuity and behavioral flexibility. Yeah. Acute sensitivity to where is, how open, how closed, what is the level of relationship, and then some flexibility in your approach, and be willing to try some things that aren't just on the script, and be seeking to have a target, an outcome for your communication. And that's always an emotional one. It's a state, it's not even to get a sale. That's an outcome with a result, but what precedes all actions or results are thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And so we're there to change beliefs, implant some thoughts in their mind, and get them in an emotional state where they're open.
Man, it's poetic almost. I love the way that you communicate. To me, it inspires me so much. What was one of the things that you learned from working with Tony, or something that he told you or that you heard while you were there that was absolutely life-changing that you can share with us? That something that maybe you haven't shared before. It's like, man, I remember I was with Tony this one time and it changed my whole perspective, or it taught me this. Do you have one of those stories? Yeah,
we were back in LA, and Tony was going to do this. It was kind of an interesting way to market the company, and wanted me to kind of head it up. And it was kind of out there. And it just, as he was walking through, it was me, Scott Humphrey, and Tony just on a three-way call. And Tony has a tendency, he just kind of goes, and there's kind of like downloads 30 minutes of talking, and it's all really amazing. You're gonna, it's like, it's just this whirlwind of information. And I think he could sense my reluctance to follow through, because I was thinking of all the challenges that I might have with this project. And he said this thing that has just also become a tenet in my life. He says, at the end of the day, you have the results that you're after, or the reasons why you don't. You can have one or the other, reasons or results. But also, whatever we focus on expands. So if you come to me with the reasons, I'll know what you're focusing on, because those are going to expand. But if you come to me with the results, I'll know where your mind is. What are you going to focus on? Results. And so then he got the commitment. And then he linked it to my identity. So when you watch Tony do those interventions, and we've kind of taken some of the process in that, when he's doing those interventions, there are 7 steps to understand and appreciate somebody's world, find this limiting pattern, get leverage, redefine the problem in solvable terms, create new empowering alternatives, conditioning it, and then making sure it's ecologically sound, or that there's a new supported identity that is going to be strong in that new environment. And so Tony, when you see him do it, he'll start labeling to somebody's identity. He's like, wow, this is who you really are. Like when you go back into that environment and somebody says this, what are you going to do? Okay, why? So he's reinforcing that identity to make sure the change actually lasts. And he did some of that to me to make sure that like I had locked it in. Like, well, what if this happens? What are you going to do? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh wow, like man, you're such a great leader. Like, and I want to keep that label.
Yeah.
Even when I go to like a hotel, I might, I'll check in, I'll connect with the front desk person, and if I need a late checkout or something, I'll go back, or I'll say something at the moment. I was like, wow, you're so helpful. A lot of people, you'd be surprised how many times I talk to somebody at a hotel and they're just not very helpful, but I can tell you really care about your job. Super helpful. And they're like, yes, thank you so much. And I go back 2 later and I ask them for a late checkout. I say, oh, you were so helpful. Remember, it's like, could I get this? Like, I know it's completely crazy for me to ask, but if I could ask you, I almost wouldn't, but you've been so helpful. They don't want to lose the positive label of being helpful. So oftentimes they'll just follow suit. So Tony's was always doing things to label me like a leader, awesome, world changer, things like that. So I see what he's doing, but it also feels so good.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose that validation. And so people, even in a sales call, we label people. Like, I'll ask somebody a question, even if they're resistant, I will immediately say, wow, like that's super helpful. Thank you so much. Like, wow, I can tell you're really clear about what you want. You'd be surprised how many people I talk to have no fucking clear idea what they actually want. We all know that research says we go further, faster with support. You'd be surprised how many people don't even realize that. I'm just glad you're not one of those people who's just clueless. So I'm framing the fact that people need help and they don't realize, some people don't realize it, they're dumb. So that automatically gets you to associate smart people realize that. And this person has, usually people that are super significance driven, to be labeled intelligent is one of their internal needs. not like the Tony Robbins needs that we find a way to meet. People have external needs too,
Right.
where if somebody's trying to prove how smart they are or whatever, we give it to them. Like they need external validation.
Yeah.
And we all have some of these.
Yeah.
And so people that are always, like even being a Jericho driver, they need to feel validated. And so once I give them some of that, they're like a dog getting a bone, and I show them how them doing this thing would make them even more significant. Now they're anchored into wanting to do the thing to help them meet the need that they're trying to get. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
right now, because you're working in personal branding.
Yeah.
So John, right now, like your brand's starting out, you're relatively new. You look like a 6-figure company, and congratulations for getting there. Most people don't. But what we're going to do is make you look like an 8-figure company. So even people that see your level, everybody's going to see you as so much more. So what I'm saying is, like by you having this, we're going to make you look like an 8-figure company. Where some of the resistance that you're getting, calls aren't closing, I'm not saying it's because they don't respect you. And by the way, when I say that I'm not saying something, I'm actually saying it. Like there's this guy, I'm not saying this guy is like manipulative.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's a bad person. And I'm not even saying that I wouldn't do business with him. But I'm not saying, but I am saying it.
Yeah.
So when I say that I'm not saying something, I'm putting the thought there.
Yeah.
And we begin that process of creating the association to it. And it happens so fast, people don't realize it.
I love it. I love it. And so what would be and thank you for sharing all that, by the way. That was absolute money. It's so much value. What's the definition of legacy for you?
Making sure my family's healthy right now. And just growing every day, legacy. I think a lot of people, when you read these self-development books and they go through it and you write this letter to yourself at your funeral, all of that, I think it's cool and all of that. I think it's important to have that compelling future, but I've lived so much of my life in my head, in the past, in the future, with worry and anxiety and all of that. I really do my best to be present, and I do that intentionally. And I think that, as they say, as you lay this brick as perfectly as a brick can be laid, pretty soon you have a wall. And I've been building a wall for a long time without even, focusing on it. And we've built something pretty amazing, just in our business without trying. But it's become these bricks of relationship, these bricks of value, these bricks of commitment, these bricks of follow through. And so every single day being present to the process and enjoying the process is how you build. What exactly we're building towards, that is like still under construction, but we have a lot of raw material here. So is it going to be a big company? Will it be a lot of JVs and partnerships? But I've always just wanted to add value and help people. And I think people really struggle with, as far as sales, not just making an offer because they can do that, but their own sense of self-worth, what it means to provide value, what it means to challenge somebody. I think we get in our own way. And I've always looked for that deeper, almost spiritual side of selling as to helping people create energy to get out of fear or shame or anger as it relates to providing value or feeling taken advantage of, but to joyously, compassionately connect with people in sales-based conversations that feel good, should feel good for you and should feel good for them. And I think that's really cool. And so that's the legacy we want to do. And if I get credit for it, great. If not, I already know we're making a difference at it. So I feel like I'm living it.
And I can feel the authenticity in your heart for you to want to serve. I think that you're the best that is doing influence, communication, storytelling, sales right now. I admire what you're doing, man. I really appreciate you coming on this episode and just dropping bombs the whole entire time, man. Thank you so much for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure having you, Eli.
Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you.